It's one thing to have a depressive episode get kicked off by a clearly stressful or traumatic life event, like grief or a job loss or something where you can say, I might be taking this harder than most people, but nobody would be living their best life under these circumstances. But what tends to be really frustrating and confusing and disorienting is when you enter into a depressive episode, especially a severe depressive episode, over either something tiny or sometimes for literally no discernible reason. Sometimes they even happen in what seems to be an otherwise good period of life. And if you're somebody who's more prone to logical, analytical type thinking, having an episode that you cannot attribute to any particular thing in your life might make you think that you are doing something wrong and that you need to change. Because we tend to have this assumption that our emotions are somehow connected or correlated to our life circumstances and our lifestyle. And so if I feel terrible, I must be living terribly. I must be doing something wrong in some way, shape, or form. And if I have a big change in my emotional state, obviously that needs to be met with equally big changes. But the thing about that is, if you have a cyclical mood disorder, like major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, then to some degree, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, I'm just trying to be real with you, episodes are a fact of life. They are probably going to happen, at least occasionally, no matter what you are doing. They can decrease in intensity, they can decrease in duration, they can decrease in frequency, but you may not ever get to a point in your life where they are gone, like eradicated from existence. And if you understand and accept that fact, then you can currently understand and accept that the presence of a depressive episode in your life doesn't mean you've screwed up, doesn't mean you're not doing this thing correctly. And that's really, really important to know, because the changes that we feel like making during a depressive episode are often motivated or driven by our emotional state in that moment. In other words, they are usually not healthy. They are usually not good changes that are actually going to improve the quality of our lives because they are driven by our current thought process and emotional state, which is one of hopelessness and pessimism and frustration. So in many cases, the urges we have when we're depressed, if we act on those urges, they actually make our lives worse and screw things up even more and move the needle in the wrong direction. I tend to think of depression as being almost like a parasite. Like when you do what depression wants you to do, it grows and it becomes stronger. It feeds off your failure. It feeds off your weakness. It feeds off your dysfunction, basically. And so there are certain things we need to kind of stay on track with during an episode. Those of us who experience depression are generally more prone to worst case thinking, negativity, pessimism, and we usually find it easier to say no to things than to say yes to things. And so the structure of the content I'm going to introduce you today is based on that idea, that when you're depressed, it's a lot easier to say no than it is to say yes. If you say no to something unhelpful or unhealthy, then you are inherently, to some degree, saying yes and moving further towards something that is beneficial and is likely to make you less depressed. Hence the phrasing of today's content. These are 14 things that you should never do during a depressive episode. Things that you should resist and fight against, and things that you absolutely should not change in the middle of an episode because it's likely to do more harm than good. And the first is messing with your values. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I have made literally in my entire life, is the first few times I became severely depressed. I thought, this must mean that I am living wrong. This must mean that the things I've been caring about and taking seriously and investing time, energy, and attention into don't serve me, because if they did, I wouldn't feel this way. And that's applying logic to an illogical experience. Major depressive disorder, depressive episodes are an illogical experience. When you feel hollow and empty inside, it makes you question your worldview. It makes you question your religions. It can make you question your relationships. I said religions. You probably don't ascribe to multiple religions. That was a weird pluralism there. The basis for this type of thinking is a cognitive distortion or a thought error called the just world fallacy. The just world fallacy states basically that all people get what they deserve. And so if you go through a rough patch in life or feel terrible, it's because you've done something wrong. You've screwed up in some way. But it's a fallacy. It's a distortion. It's not true. Do good things ever happen to bad people? Yeah, they do. Do bad things ever happen to good people? Yeah, they do. You aren't exempt from that equation. You can have a period of your life that is unfairly unpleasant or difficult. And so don't take that as a sign that everything you've been doing up until that moment is wrong. The worst thing that I did in my first depressive episode is I really, really distanced myself from my family because I up until that point, I'd been a very family oriented. I was much more family oriented than friend oriented as a kid. And I inverted that because I thought, well, if this is, if this life is what being a family person gets me, then, I'm going to try, I must need a bigger social network or something. And I won't turn this too much into my little soapbox moment here, but I deeply regret that. Don't change your values just because you're depressed. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are living wrong. Sometimes it's just something that happens to you. The second thing you should not do while you're depressed, this one gets an asterisk because sometimes it might eventually be a good idea, is quit your job. Now, I don't mean that you should never quit your job. I mean, that should not probably be your first reaction to a depressive episode. Yes, stress absolutely can worsen depression. And most of us experience a lot of stress in the workplace. But rather than just instantly quitting because you're struggling, I would strongly recommend that you consider taking a leave of absence instead. Take an FMLA leave or a short-term disability leave if you have it, which could eventually turn into a long-term disability leave, and use the time that frees up to get treatment, maybe even intensive treatment. Unless you live somewhere very, very rural, there most likely are intensive treatment options available for you. So look at things like intensive outpatient programs, partial hospitalization programs. These are not inpatient. These are not residential. These are programs that are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 30 hours a week of intensive treatment that are typically designed for people who are really struggling to do basic things like go to work, go to school, take care of themselves, but they allow you to maintain freedom and autonomy and flexibility. You may eventually end up quitting your job, and sometimes that may be the right decision. But try to avoid just impulsively making that choice because you're struggling, because it might be hard to get back into the workforce when you've been out for a while if you didn't have some kind of disability leave to justify that. The third thing you should not do during a depressive episode is spontaneously go off your medications. I know that it's frustrating to be taking all these pills every day and still experience the exact thing that they are supposed to prevent. I know, I get it. But they're not magic, and they don't work perfectly all the time. Just because you experience a depressive episode while you are taking an antidepressant or a mood stabilizer does not mean that the medication isn't working. It may mean that that's not the right medication or the right dosage for you, or it may just mean this isn't going to perfectly 100% cure you of this condition. But the problem with going off medications out of frustration during an episode is then you're going to experience psychiatric medication withdrawal during a depressive episode, and it's actually going to get worse. See, all psychiatric medications work on one or more neurotransmitters or brain chemicals. While you're taking this medication, the availability of that neurotransmitter increases in your brain. But your brain eventually realizes, whoa, we've got all this extra chemicals coming in from this medication. And so acutely, temporarily, the baseline production of that chemical goes down. So you get a depressive episode while you're on a medication and you think, well, this is stupid. This is how I felt before I started taking the medication. That means the medication isn't doing anything. So you stop taking the medication. Your brain doesn't instantly adjust to not suddenly getting a boost of that neurotransmitter from an external source, and you now are experiencing a level of depression that you have never felt before, a new low because you're withdrawing during an episode. It's very similar to like if you drink coffee or an energy drink. If you have a couple of those every day for like a year, and then tomorrow you're like, I'm not going to do it, you're not going to be normal you before you started drinking coffee or before you started drinking energy drinks. you're going to be the most tired human being on earth because your brain is not used to having to do all that on its own. It's used to getting some support. So I strongly recommend that you don't go off medications during an episode. Talk to your provider about it, strategize, make a plan. Don't just take matters into your own hands. That usually makes things worse, not better. On a very similar note, I also recommend that you don't quit going to therapy during an episode. Same logic as with the antidepressants. It's not literally physiological withdrawal, but I understand what this feels like from your end of things. Again, I'm putting all this time and energy into doing this thing that is supposed to help me, and I still feel the same way I did when I wasn't doing it. So why am I going to keep doing it? Because that doesn't mean it's doing nothing. Because you're comparing the way you feel today to the way you felt yesterday, and it's worse. What you don't have a comparison for is yourself in therapy compared to alternate reality version of you that isn't in therapy. And if that person is doing worse than you are, even on this particular day, then therapy is working. Remember that working doesn't mean working perfectly. If you experience moderate to severe depression or anxiety, it's probably not going to be one thing that fixes it. You're probably not going to have to just go to therapy or just start taking medication or just start going to the gym or just work on sleep hygiene. You're probably going to have to do all those things and probably some other things too. Your symptoms are likely multifactorial, meaning caused by more than one thing. I think very few of us get depressed or get anxious because one thing is wrong. It's a mix of many, many different things that compound year after year after year. And so it's this very complicated web of things to untangle that's incredibly difficult to do even with help. Trying to do it on your own, and I speak from experience here, it can be a nightmare. So I don't think that the middle of a depressive episode is probably the best time to quit therapy. I know you're frustrated. It's okay to be frustrated. It might be the time to consider changing approaches in therapy. Maybe the strategy that you guys are working on collaboratively, or the specific therapist that you're working with, or the modality that they're working on is not quite correct for you. It could mean maybe you need to see them more often, actually. A lot of therapists, their default is every other week. And I think that can be very appropriate for mild symptoms. If you have moderate to severe symptoms, I recommend weekly. And so if you're not seeing your therapist weekly and you're struggling, rather than quitting therapy, maybe you should double up on therapy instead and actually go more often if your therapist can accommodate that for you. The fifth thing that you should not do during a depressive episode is isolate yourself. Stay home so you only hear your own negative echo chamber of a mind. It's not good for you because your thoughts and your feelings are going to align with your current emotional state. So when you're feeling very depressed, your thoughts are going to be depressing. Your appraisal of yourself is going to be depressing. And you have no alternate viewpoints to access. And so holding yourself up in your room or your house and not going anywhere is typically going to make your symptoms worse and last longer. You should leave the house. You should go to where people are, even if you don't interact with them. That's the thing. Even just being around human beings, even if you don't like people that much, and even if you're a very introverted person, then go to a coffee shop with a book and your headphones and just exist in a space where it's not just you. It really isn't good for us. Even the most introverted among us needs some level of connection and an occasional human interaction to feel okay. The amount of people who can truly be alone and isolated and be at peace with that they exist, but it's minimal and it's probably not you. Text people, play online games instead of single player games. Stay active on chat forums. Be selective about which ones for sure. But don't just withdraw from humanity when you are depressed. It will make it worse and it will make it last longer. I guarantee it. The fifth thing you should not do, I think we're on number 5. I've lost track of my numbers, so I'm just going to start saying another thing at this point, is stay up all night. I know that insomnia, of course, is a very, very common symptom of depression. And we also tend to get that revenge bedtime procrastination where, for a lot of us, the nighttime when it's just us and we have freedom and autonomy, if you have a job, if you have a family, if you are in school, that's like maybe the only time you have to yourself and can really do just whatever you want. And so I get that it's really, really hard to finally take that free time, that agency that you've been waiting for all day long and being like, I'm going to use this to be unconscious. I know that that's not a real compelling proposition on the surface, but you need sleep. And if you spend hours at night, scrolling your phone, playing games on your phone, playing online games, whatever it is. I know I just said to play online games, but I didn't mean while you should be sleeping. It's just going to compound the depression. Your fatigue is going to get worse. Your motivation is going to get lower. Your brain is not going to function as well, and it's going to have a harder time fending off the negative thoughts. I know that dealing with insomnia and sleeping when you're depressed and avoiding all these distractions is easier said than done. I do have a tool that you can use to make that easier, and that is a sleep mask. Sleep masks are my personal favorite way, other than just like not having the phone in your bedroom, which I always tell people to do, but no one really does it, of avoiding the stimulation that is typically right there at your fingertips while you're trying to sleep. Because I know I don't even like my phone that much, and it even gets me sometimes. I'm laying there, 10, 15 minutes go by, I'm impatient, and I'm like, I should check my Facebook or whatever. When it's right there, it's just such an easy temptation. I even do it without thinking about it sometimes. But I have a sleep mask. I use one from a company called Manta Sleep. I've tested a few, and they are by far the most comfortable, in my opinion. Once I put the sleep mask on, it's a transition. Like, I'm not going to take the mask off to look at my phone. Because obviously, if you're wearing a sleep mask, you can't see your phone. And so it's a point of demarcation that says my sleep window has begun. I am making a commitment that this period of time in my day is for sleep. And I'm not going to mess with other stuff. I'm just going to work on relaxing and sleeping. If you're still struggling with insomnia, even with a sleep mask, it is worth remembering that even if you are laying there in a peaceful, it's dark, it's quiet, your eyes are closed, but you're awake and conscious, that's still restful. It is not as restful for your brain as being fully asleep, but it is more restful for your brain than if your brain is being stimulated by technology or whatnot. So I strongly recommend anyone who struggles with insomnia, whether that is like physiological insomnia, where you're laying there for hours and you can't sleep, or if you have that behavioral insomnia, where it's like you're just doing other stuff, try a sleep mask, and specifically try Manta Sleep, because I think they make the best ones on the market. I will leave a link in the description to today's video. Manta is a sponsor of today's video, and in general, a sponsor of this channel, who I am very grateful to have. I think they make excellent products that can help a lot of people. Please consider checking them out. The next thing you should not do is the inverse of not sleeping, which is you also shouldn't sleep all day long. When you sleep all day long, you basically end up, at the end of the day, with no evidence to counter all the dark, negative, shameful, critical thoughts in your mind. And I know you might not literally be sleeping all day long. You might just be laying in bed, quote, bed rotting, right? It's just going to prolong things. It's just going to make them worse. You got to get out of bed if you want to stop feeling depressed. Because what's going to happen from your bed that's going to make your brain say, you know what? I feel better today. This is an improvement. Nothing, because there's no inputs. There's no stimulation. There's just fake artificial screen stimulation. Nothing is occurring in your life that's going to, quote, snap you out of it. Not that it's like a switch flips, but you do gradually come out of these episodes. But part of what starts to pull you out of these episodes are things happening in your life that make you feel differently or make you feel better. And when you're in bed, there's no opportunity for that. So get out of bed, ideally get out of the bedroom, and ideally, like I said before, even get out of the house for a little bit. Go somewhere and do something so that your brain has actual stimulation and information other than just artificial digital stuff. See if it doesn't decrease the duration and the intensity of your depressive episodes if you stick with it. 90+% of the time, anecdotally, that I've seen in myself and my therapy clients and my coaching clients, it does. Another thing you should not do is ignore your hobbies, is not do anything that feels good. When we get that anhedonia with our depressive episodes, everything feels like a raw deal because you put time and energy and attention into the things that normally make you feel good, and suddenly they don't. You get nothing out of it. And it's like going to work and not getting paid. And so it's very natural and very understandable to stop doing those things. But when you stop engaging in activities that have the potential to create joy, you end up experiencing a prolonged depressive episode, which I call false depression, which is a period of time during which you are physiologically capable of feeling joy, but not experiencing any joy because nothing's happening in your life that would produce it. If you normally get joy from reading books and gardening and going out with your friends and rock climbing, and you stop doing all those things, you're not gonna just spontaneously feel joy because you exist. The skies aren't gonna part someday, and the light will shine on your face, and you will hear an angelic choir saying, "You are no longer depressed. Go out there and live your life again." You won't know because there's not gonna be any indicator in your life. There's not gonna be a moment where you're like, "Hey, I just did a thing and it felt good," because you're not doing the things. So pick one thing and just do that thing for at least 10 minutes every day. Something that you enjoy consistently and typically under normal circumstances so that you can test the limits of your depression. And so that the day it starts to lift, you know, and then you can hit it hard from that point on. Another thing you should try not to do, use food for comfort. Sometimes food kind of feels like it can give us that quick win, right? Because maybe even though emotionally you're feeling very little, you might still be receptive to physiological inputs, to sensory inputs. And so my hobbies don't feel good, but my food still tastes good. And so I'm going to replace the joy that I normally get from socializing or being physically active or accomplishing things around my home. I'm going to replace that with pleasurable sensations associated with food intake. It's logical. It makes sense, except that the problem is it's going to end up exacerbating your depression because A, you're going to feel guilt and shame about overeating. B, your energy level and motivation are going to tank because your metabolism has to work harder than it normally does when you eat more food than you normally do. Do you know what your metabolism uses primarily to increase its activity when it has more food in it than it's used to? I said that wrong, but the point is the same. The resource it has to use is blood flow. So if you eat a lot of food, your metabolic system pulls more blood flow into itself to help digest that food. Because it's like, hey, we got a little bit of like a log jam going on here. We got to move this stuff through. It's going to be harder than normal. It pulls extra blood, extra resources. You know where it pulls a lot of that blood from? The brain. That's why you feel that. That's why, people fall asleep on Thanksgiving. It's not the turkey. I mean, it might be the quantity of the turkey. It's not, turkey doesn't actually have like an abnormally high amount of tryptophan in it. That's basically like an urban legend. People fall asleep on holidays because they binge ate, especially because they binge ate like pie and sweets, which spike and then crash your blood sugar. So you get exhausted because your body's having to work extra hard to digest 2 or 3 times the amount of food it normally has in it. So when you engage in excess eating, you're exacerbating the symptoms that you already have because you're in a depressive episode. And it ultimately just makes things worse. That's the word. However, another thing you shouldn't do with food is stop eating, because that's the flip side to this coin, right? Is sometimes our physiological inputs kind of numb and we become anhedonic. We don't feel anything from eating. And it's almost like you're sick, like you have COVID or something, like your food suddenly feels very bland and tasteless and eating just becomes a thankless chore. But you end up with the same problem as if you overeat, because food, caloric energy, is something your brain needs to work. And so if our food intake drops dramatically during a depressive episode, now your brain goes into low power mode. It's basically like a battery saving mode because it doesn't have the resources it needs to regulate your emotions and think critically and produce motivation. So you end up just kind of in like this zombie state. You're functional and you're alive, but there's no vibrancy to you. There's no energy to you. There's no drive to you. And that's partially because you're depressed, and it's also partially because your brain has no food. Your brain needs caloric energy to work. When food and eating become thankless, rather than relying on hunger cues, because you won't really have them is the thing. Like you're going to have to kind of grind it out. You're not going to really want to work. Use a schedule or a timer or a clock. Like I've had people do this. I've done this myself. Set timers on your phone. Set a breakfast, lunch, and dinner timer, and when it goes off, eat some food. Stick with safe foods if you want. That's okay. If there's really only a few foods that you can kind of like choke down during an episode, that's all right. Do it. But don't restrict. And I know you're not doing it on purpose probably, but don't let your lack of appetite, because that's a symptom of depression. This is the core principle. Don't live your life based on your symptoms. If you align with that symptom and follow that symptom, you will feel worse. And so you have to do the opposite of what you feel like doing in order to feel better. It's that DBT opposite action skill. Another thing you should not do is exclusive. This one's going to, some of you won't like this, and I wouldn't have liked it 20 years ago either, but it's true. So hear me out. You shouldn't only consume media that aligns with your emotional state. So I used to, when I was depressed, I would try to consume very like existential, nihilistic, dark media, anime. I'm not saying all anime is like that, but like a lot of them are, or gaming, or music. I listen to a lot of really depressing like metal and industrial music. And I'm not saying that that's inherently bad, but when you only seek out confirmatory media, when you turn towards things that match what you already think and feel, well, what do you think is going to happen if you do that? It's like if you're depressed and you go hang out with 10 depressed people and they're all like, yeah, you're right. Like everything sucks. This is all terrible. It's all probably for nothing. There's validation in that. And validation can be nice to realize I'm not the only person in the world who feels this way. There's a degree of it that can be helpful, but it's really easy to overdo it and just like marinate yourself in all-consuming negativity and pessimism. That's not going to help you. So make sure that you also, I'm going to say it this way, make sure that you also expose yourself to what I would consider emotionally aspirational media, meaning stuff that relates to how you want to feel, because sometimes that can help you flip the switch. Watch stand-up comedy. I mean, that's honestly, that's a good middle ground because a lot of it is actually very dark in nature, but then it has the lightness of the humor, right? Or listen to a song. I'm not saying it has to be like a happy, upbeat pop song, but something that at least has some degree of positivity to it. Super obscure reference, but you guys, there's always one or two people who are like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that thing. I remember I had one depressive episode where I discovered the album Through the Ashes of Empire by Machine Head. So they're like a metalcore band. So it's not happy music. I mean, it's about like addiction and abuse and stuff like that. But the songs all have like strength and courage. They're ultimately about overcoming those things. And I remember like listening to that album, and it just like that actually started. I'm not saying, oh, listen to that album and you won't be depressed anymore. No, but like hearing someone voice some of what I was thinking and feeling, but then feeling like also you're strong enough to get through it, really was what I needed and did a lot more for me than like if it was just the first half. I mean, I think that's why some of you guys like me too, because I don't sugarcoat things and I'm not the world's like happiest, most upbeat person, but I don't ever come on here and make content that's just doom and gloom all the time. There's always like, yeah, this sucks. Here's what we can do. Here's how you can overcome this. And I think we need that. So make sure you're not just in your own little depression echo chamber. You also should try your best not to turn to drugs and alcohol. And I get it. You need the quick wins. You need something that can reliably boost your mood and make you feel better. And when you're in an episode, your options become very, very slim for things that actually do that. So of course you want to turn towards those things where you're like, I know if I do this, I know I will feel at least a little better for at least a little period of time. But drugs and alcohol have chronic negative implications for the function of your neurotransmitters and for your biorhythms. So again, your neurotransmitter functions are the chemicals that make you feel less depressed and less anxious, like dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin. Drugs and alcohol impact the functioning of those neurotransmitters, which is why they make you feel better for a little bit. But then there's sort of like, it's kind of like buying something on a credit card. Like, yeah, you can get this cool thing quickly, but there's going to be a cost to pay later. And not only are you going to have to pay back everything you just borrowed, there's going to be interest on it. Drugs and alcohol are like 30% APR credit cards. That's basically what they are. There's going to be interest, and it's going to be high. It's going to be unrealistically high to the point where really no one should ever do this because it's pretty much never going to be worth it. And biorhythms, they screw up your appetite. They screw up your energy level. They screw up your sleep. And those are all the things we need to get back on track or try desperately to hold on to and keep on track during a depressive episode so that it lasts days or weeks rather than months or years. So try your best to resist those urges. And when you need that boost, get the boost from achievement, get the boost from hobbies, get the boost from social connections. Try to get the boost from, I know it's cliche to say, healthy sources instead. Also, drugs and alcohol screw up your meds. So there's one more reason to avoid them. Another thing you should try not to do is engage in impulsive shopping or gambling. And I know I literally just used the credit card metaphor, which kind of like blows this one because that's basically what I was going to say for this one too. So this one will be kind of short, but it's another quick win, right? Like if you can go out and buy something really cool, maybe it doesn't make you feel quite as depressed for a little bit. The thing is, even when you're not depressed, the pleasure that you get from most acquisitions, like physical, monetary acquisitions, doesn't last very long, right? Like maybe a day if you're lucky, if it's something really cool. When you're depressed, that timeline typically shrinks and it's like 10 minutes. Like by the time you get home, you're probably like over the thing you bought most of the time. And so now you're still depressed, but you have less money. Not really a great win for you. The one exception I can think of to this, the one asterisk, and I'm not saying this to enable anybody, but if a purchase that enables a new hobby or a new activity, that might be something you get lasting value out of. So I'm not saying like you should never shop when you're depressed. Like you might still need to buy stuff. But try to avoid just kind of the impulse, don't go to a store with no agenda and be like, I'm just going to try to find something to want so that I can buy it. Because essentially what you're doing when you shop with no agenda or no list is you're going out into the world or on the phone in search of a problem that can only be solved by the expenditure of money. So you see something that you didn't know existed before you saw it. And when you see this thing, you want this thing. And wanting creates a deficit state. You are now less happy than you were before because now you know that your life feels less complete without this thing than if you had it. And the only way to close that gap is money. So you create a problem that you then have to solve with what is probably a very limited resource in the first place. So yeah, try not to do that. Another thing you should not do is blame yourself. And this one is hard. I am kind of the king of self-blame. And there's a fine line here because we're not helpless. Like you don't have zero agency over your depression. That's kind of the whole point of today's video, right? Is there are things you can do that make this happen less often to you or not as severely or for not as short a period of time. But many people who have chronic mood disorders will have episodes even under the best of circumstances. I still have episodes. Then they're like maybe 1 or 2 weeks a year now, whereas it used to be like I would have 1 or 2 weeks a year asymptomatic in my teen years. And they're a lot milder now, usually. Every now and then I get a really bad one out of nowhere, but not frequently. You can do everything right and still be depressed sometimes because your brain's just a little bit different. And sometimes it's just going to be like, sorry, friend, but you don't get any dopamine today. And that sucks. I know it sucks, but blaming yourself just makes it worse. So try not to do that. You should also not stop using your body. Did I say that right? Yes, I did. Double negatives are confusing. Did I say that right? I did say that right. Because if I didn't say not, I'd say you should stop using your body. And you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't stop using your body. That was an awesome sentence there. Because being sedentary decreases blood and oxygen to the brain, which worsens depressive symptoms like fatigue, low motivation, low mood. Obviously, your energy level and your motivation are going to be lower when you're depressed. So if you had a workout routine and now you're in a depressive episode, maybe it's going to be less. Maybe normally you go to the gym for an hour and maybe now you can only handle 15 minutes. Okay, it might decrease. It might drop. That's acceptable. That might happen. Don't let it get eliminated because that's going to make your depressive episode more severe. It's going to make it last longer, and it's going to be harder to re-engage your physical activity routine when you come out of the episode, because you will come out of the episode. And physical activity is a very, very strong preventative factor for future episodes. And the last thing, at least that I can think of today, there's probably more, but the last thing that you should not do during a depressive episode is kill yourself. And I don't know if you knew that one was coming or not, but I'm just going to put it out there. This is an episode. There will be a period of time in your future where you're not in an episode anymore. It will end. I know that it feels never ending sometimes, but that's because you have that mood congruent memory system in your brain. It's no different than when fall weather starts, which it will in, 6 weeks, something like that. When you feel that first chill in the air and suddenly you start thinking about pumpkins and flannels and football and apple pie, because that's how our memory works. We have these cues that are basically like hashtags in our brain. Whatever we're experiencing, our brain thinks about other things that are related to that experience. And so when you're really struggling, you think about times when you've struggled and you feel like life is one nonstop, never-ending struggle. And it might have been more struggle than not up until this point, and I'm not promising an instant turnaround on that, but they don't last forever. And you can continue using all the stuff we talked about today and all the other stuff I talk about on my channel, plus things you learn in therapy, hopefully, to adjust those ratios and get it to the point where the depression is less than half the time. And hopefully, way down the road, maybe like 5% of the time. And if you're non-depressed, asymptomatic, 90 to 95% of the time, things are going to start to feel pretty good for you. I know that's a real thing because that's where I'm at. And I was pretty much at the bottom for a long time. So it can be done. So don't kill yourself, please. It's not gonna get you there. All right. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I don't know how to end a section about not killing yourself other than just by saying not to do it again, because that's where I stand on that. I don't think it's a good idea. I hope this helps. I hope you consider subscribing, leaving a comment, giving me a like, always appreciated. Your comments are pretty much the reason I do this. Just knowing that it makes a difference to you guys is what I'm here for. So take care, and I will see you next time. Good luck.